Amazing. So after that delay, sorry guys, I guess we should get this started. Hi, my name is Stephanie Brumsey. I am the Vice President of Special Events for the Newswomen's Club of New York, and I am joined here tonight by Carolyn Fairchild from LinkedIn in the first of our series called On the Front Page. What we're trying to do is to focus on our front page awards winners, who are these amazing group of women with these amazing award-winning works. And we want to talk more about what they do, what they cover, how they cover it, why they cover it. And Caroline has agreed to join us today, which is apropos because it is Equal Pay Day. And she focuses a lot of her work on centering on women. And if you don't know what Equal Pay Day is, I mean, just go by Twitter for a minute and you'll find out. But Equal Pay Day is the day that women in general equals out to getting paid the same amount of money that men get paid. So it takes a year and this is March, a year and 3 months for women to make what men make in 1 year.
That's primarily white women. It's much worse for Black women. And
yes, I actually have those numbers.
Yeah.
So this year, so today this is all women, but March 9th is Equal Pay Day for AAPI women. August 3rd is Equal Pay Day for Black women. September 8th is Equal Pay Day for Native American women. And October 2nd is Equal Pay Day for Latinas and Hispanic women. And if that doesn't get you angry, not sure what else will. But Ms. Fairchild here is the editor-at-large for LinkedIn News, and she hosts, I'm sorry, I was gonna say this specifically, but she hosts the live news show for LinkedIn. And so first, I wanna get into the basics. Caroline, can you tell me a little bit about your career path? Where did you start? Is this what you wanted to do? Is this what you were imagining you were gonna end up hosting news shows and whatnot?
I certainly didn't expect that I would end up doing this on LinkedIn, but we can unpack that a little bit. Stephanie, first, just thank you so much for hosting this conversation. And I see some familiar names backstage, if you will. So I'm happy to be in discussion with all of you. It's interesting. I was actually just talking to a former mentor of mine from college, and he asked me that same question, if I always thought I wanted to be a journalist. And I think I did. At one point, I flirted with the idea of being a lawyer, but found that journalism was a little bit more fun. I started my career at Bloomberg News, where I kind of cut my teeth in traditional economic writing and reporting. And then quickly from there, moved on to the Huffington Post, where I was a business reporter as well. And then it wasn't really until I joined Fortune magazine that my focus in women and women in the workplace started to form. When I was at Fortune, I had the opportunity of launching a newsletter called The Broadsheet, which is a daily newsletter about women in business. And really loved that opportunity. Got a lot of opportunities really quickly to both write for the magazine as well as the website. And then it was about 6 years ago that Dan Roth, LinkedIn's editor-in-chief, reached out to me and asked me if I was interested in starting a newsroom at LinkedIn. And I think initially I was like, I think I remember thinking in the back of my head, absolutely not. It sounded so far-fetched to me that this professional network was interested in business journalists like me. They were interested in investing in editorial. But I took the jump because I really believed in the vision that our editor-in-chief kind of set out for us. And, back then we had only like 6 or 7 editors, and now we're up to around 70 journalists around the world who are covering the professional world. And I have the great pleasure of being able to do that with equity in mind. So I focus a lot of my coverage on gender and racial equity and how to bring more of that to the workplace.
Amazing. You touched on it a little bit in your talk right there, but can we unpack that a bit? Because when I think of LinkedIn, even still to this day, even though it's evolved quite a bit, my first thought is, oh, I'm going to go in there and update my profile because that's where recruiters look if they want to find me. That's
Well,
my
you should
digital
do that.
resume.
That's still a good idea. We're not dissuading you from doing that.
Right. But now there is a whole, I mean, there's an entire news platform going on here. I mean, I have a good friend, of course, whose name is escaped my mind a moment. I was gonna say it's Seaman, who does the
Andrew,
LinkedIn,
yeah.
Andrew Seaman, who writes the newsletter. He and I worked together at Reuters for quite some time. And I knew that this was happening, but it seems like it's so robust. Like, what is going, as someone who's the editor at large for LinkedIn News, can you tell me a little bit about that, about the development of this news platform that you guys have going on, what you see happening here, and why it's important for incoming journalists who are still working in the field to focus some of their attention on getting their clips, their articles on LinkedIn, not only as evidence of the work that they do at their own outlets, but also because it's such a robust audience.
Yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of people feel like the appearance of news on LinkedIn was kind of like, it felt like kind of how you feel when you're falling asleep. It's nothing. And then it's suddenly all at once. But to give you a little background, so it's been, I've been on the team for 6 years, but the editorial team had in its substance has been around for around 8. And we've slowly but surely just built up an operation that's really focused on how do we deliver news and information in an accurate and credible way to the nearly 800 million members that we have around the world. And like Stephanie, you're right. I think when people initially think about LinkedIn, they're like, oh, that's the place where I go to get a job. But the reality is that in order to continue to stay relevant in your career is you need to stay informed on what's going on in your industry, what's going on at your company, what's going on with the working world overall. And I think, to put a finer point on it, I think that this pandemic has really enlarged the role of the employer when it comes to responsibilities that they have with their workforce, talking about things like mental health. And I think more and more people are increasingly looking to their networks and trusted places like LinkedIn for that information. And the goal of LinkedIn News is to make sure that they find it there. So to give you a little sense of how the team is organized and operated, we have a team that's a daily news team here in the US specifically that's really focused with making sure that the top business news and headline is curated for you on LinkedIn. And then we have a distribution team that ensures that the right news is getting to you at the right time. So those are 2 of our largest teams here in the US. And then the team that I sit on and have the privilege to work on, and Andrew sits on the same team, is more focused on original content. So we have a team of journalists that are doing original writing and reporting, doing live interviews like I do on LinkedIn. And that's really with the hopes of making sure that people see LinkedIn as a credible place for data insights, for bringing the top business minds on. And we've just seen a lot of growth in that area since we started.
Amazing. Now, you weren't always the editor at large of LinkedIn News, right? I'm not incorrect there.
That is correct.
Okay, great. I was like, did my research fail me? But like you said before, you were able to focus a lot of your work on women, equity in the world, women being left behind, both in the newsroom and in their daily lives. I mean, that was what you won your front page awards for the women and the parents, and how they were impacted by the pandemic. I have a couple questions around that, right? How, right? Like, can that be my first question? How? So often we have these ideas that we want to talk about, and you get into the newsroom and they're just like, nobody's gonna want to read about that. Who cares? Or maybe that's for like the mommy Facebook group, right? How do you get your editors, the editors there at LinkedIn, to sign on to this idea for the women in the room who want to hear and maybe want to do that, right? Like, how do you get them to realize that this is important?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'd say a couple of things there. You're right. Like Stephanie, my original job and the reason that I was hired to join LinkedIn was not to write about equity in the workplace. At least my first job, actually, I did a lot of work covering startups and venture capital, more traditional beats that you see in traditional newsrooms. I made it my side hustle about I would say 2 or 3 years ago. It was something that I've always been passionate about. I was managing a team of about 6 or 7 reporters at the time. And on the side, I started doing 2 things. I started my newsletter, Working Together, which was fortunate enough to win the Front Page Award earlier this year. And I started just doing that really without even the go ahead by our editor in chief, and just proving out the case that this is something that not only do people care about, but people want to engage with. So I started doing that. And then I also started LinkedIn Live became a thing about a couple years ago. And I started to just go live and talk to leaders in the diversity and inclusion space, female founders, female business leaders, and brought them on weekly onto a show that I booked, produced, hosted, the whole 9 yards. And it was with that side hustle that I was able to go to our editor in chief and kind of prove out a case that this could be a full-time job. And, I give him credit for realizing that. And then I'll also say, just look at the times. Like, I think that this pandemic and its outsized impact on women, on people of color, combined with, like I said earlier, just how much employers are now having to think holistically about equity issues. I think it's a no-brainer that every newsroom has someone specifically on this beat.
Oh, definitely.
At least one person, more people.
Yes. Can we say that louder? Can we say that again? Yes. I mean, you were talking to me a little bit in our emails back and forth about how you try to thematically cover issues about women in the workplace. Can you delve into some of those things, some of those topics, that topic of how many women have lost jobs? Why do you think it's important, especially on this website that so many people think about job hunting, right? To get that across and clear to the world in particular.
Yeah. I mean, how much time do you have? I think
all the time. Take it, girl.
I think, there are 2.4 million fewer working women in the workforce right now than when we look at December of 2019. Those are 2.4 million women who had career aspirations, 2.4 million women who were responsible for putting food on the table, and they're out of work right now. If that's not alarming to employers, then they're not really sounding the alarm bells right now within their organizations to think more holistically about not just how they are recruiting female talent right now, but how they're retaining the current female talent that they have. It is going to be just such a detriment to millions of women's careers. We're having this conversation on equal pay day right now. If you think about that time, we know from previous data that when women step out of work in particular, it has a dramatic impact on their earning potential over time. So if you think about a woman who lost her job in this pandemic, it's going to have an outsized impact on what she's able to earn for the rest of her career, unless companies, recruiters, managers, business leaders actually start to put programs and policies in place that ensure that this doesn't happen. So it's interesting because I've been covering women in the workplace now for about a decade. And I remember my early days at Fortune when I started the broadsheet, and it very much was looked at as kind of like the cute pink beat over on the side, like, oh, that's Caroline. She covers women and the women thing. And I see that shifting because it has to shift, right? I think the business case of why your teams at work need to be diverse is completely played out. And now it's become really a societal issue of equity that business leaders are now speaking about. And so I try and hit on that in my work. I think like in terms of the larger themes, I mean, there's so many different buckets to unpack. We talked a little bit about the women who have lost their jobs, but then there's so much to write about in terms of the women who are still in the workforce right now. And, you know, we have data from LinkedIn that shows that, you know, there are a lot of women right now who are quote unquote sheltering in job, which is basically like they're just hanging on. They don't see their career progressing. You know, 42% of working women at one point in this pandemic have considered quitting their jobs. So there's a lot at risk, even on the cusps of the workforce right now, where women are feeling like they're taking on an outsized role in the home. They're not getting the support that they need in their managers. 60% of working women that we surveyed told us that their managers haven't asked how they're doing in this pandemic. So there's a lot of concerning trends that if we don't kind of figure this out collectively, it could continue to be just a detriment for working women everywhere.
Yeah, you have an article and it's titled "Working Parents Are Struggling. Why is no one doing anything?" And in it, you delve into the mental health issues that face these women as they're home with their children, if they have children, and now they're living at home, which is also work, and you're also homeschooling children and or taking care of the child, and it has become this overwhelming life and career, and the place where you called a refuge once you came home, you took off your heels or whatever it was you were wearing. And these women no longer get that solace, right? But I have a question about your title, right? Like working parents are struggling. Why is no one doing anything about it? Have you come across in all your reporting any ideas about what businesses should or shouldn't do, employees, employers? Like, have you seen any businesses that have enacted any good practices to help struggling parents as they struggle to homeschool and be effective workers and provide a different opportunity other than quitting for their female employees?
Yeah, certainly. I think, you know, it's not all bad news, despite some of the headlines that I have put up on LinkedIn. I think that some of the best employers are doing a good job of thinking about like programs that will help on-ramp women who have taken a break for one reason or another and now are re-entering the workforce. One thing that really encourages me is that we're seeing an increase. While a lot of companies track gender representation across their organization and they track racial representation, there are very few companies that track both. So women of color basically get left behind when those metrics are dispelled out. And I see a lot of companies doubling down and making sure that they're not just looking at gender or race, they're looking at gender and race. Because as we know, when it rains for white women, it's thunderstorms for women of color. And so I think seeing more companies and more leaders take that intersectional lens, seeing companies like Goldman Sachs invest billions of dollars in Black women in particular over the next 10 years. These are things that tell me that progress is being made. What I will say also is, the companies that are thinking more holistically around how they're presenting job opportunities, flexibility has been a top request for working women, for working parents, even as seen as kind of a perk before this pandemic. And I think that the good news is right now is that for a lot of managers who may have been skeptical of working from home or giving that flexible workplace schedule to a mom who may want to, be able to pick her kid up from soccer practice and then log back into work at the end of the day, the pandemic has kind of forced a lot of managers to see that that can work for a lot of different people. And so I think as we think about what the workplace looks like after this crisis, it could mean that in a lot of industries that women are going to have more opportunities because they're able to work in a different way. And it's not just women. I'm just thinking, people with physical disabilities, people with unseen disabilities, just people who don't fit the white male stereotypical has a wife at home, yes, who's taking care of the kids and going into the office at 9 and leaving at 6 model that unfortunately a lot of our workplaces were created for. And so I think in recreating those assumptions around how companies need to be modeled, how they practice certain things, could benefit women if it's done correctly.
Definitely. Before I get to my next question, I just want to let the audience know that you're going to have an opportunity to ask questions in a few minutes. So if you have a question, please hit that little button that allows you to raise your hand. And then when I start taking questions, I'll take them in the order in which I've received them. And then you can ask Caroline your questions. Now, back to you. I was watching, some clips of the LinkedIn Live. And what struck me was, and I know you've spoken about it, but what struck me was how diverse the group of people that you spoke to was. Is I mean, I if you don't know anything about me, I work for MSNBC. We make it I have two Black hosts. One is a woman, one is a man, and we make it our business to ensure that our panels are, racially and gender diverse every weekend. It is on our list. Like, oh no, this panel's too white. Let's talk about this again, right? And yet here you are doing this on LinkedIn with these high-level professionals talking about issues that are really important. How? Tell me all the things. How did you find them? How did give it to me. Give it all to me.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for saying that. We're doing the work, Stephanie. And I think that's essential if, particularly when you think about the business world, it's a lot of white dudes who want to talk about what they know about their business. And if you're not careful, I think about this in my written work, but specifically in my work for the live show, because that is such a visual form of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And the way that I think about it is that, LinkedIn is the digital representation of the professional world. If I'm only interviewing white males, I'm reflecting back to the digital community on LinkedIn that is what the professional world looks like. And that's certainly not something that I want to do or a stereotype that I want to perpetuate. So I take it very seriously. My team of producers takes it extremely seriously, that we're thinking really critically. Every single week, we do a check-in where we're actually looking at the guests that we brought in this week and looking at it through a diversity lens to ensure that we're hitting the mark, not just every quarter, but literally every week. And sometimes in shows we do miss, and we have a conversation about why. But I think, in terms of what we do is that, every time that I have someone who I have on the show who is, a bit outside of my network or looks different than I do, I always ask them, like, is there anyone else that we should be speaking to? That's either in my written work or, in my work on the show. And then I do the work to expand my network that way, because honestly, I think that's really the only way that you can do it. And the reality is that there are incredibly diverse voices who are experts in everything that has to touch the business world. And candidly, they make better guests most of the time than some of the white male leaders. Well, don't get me wrong. I love me a white man, but I don't have to talk to one every single day. I have my husband for that. So that's good. Check done. So yeah, I think you have to do the work. You have to be diligent about it. And what you don't measure doesn't change. And so really being critical around reporting out even internally to the team. And this is something that we do across LinkedIn News, not just in the work that I do, reporting out internally to the team how we're doing. And so yeah.
Awesome. Can I ask you, like, for those who might be in the audience and who want to, who are seeing this and giving this thought to, well, how would you suggest, besides asking them once you're already interviewing them, because you already have them, right? How would you suggest reaching out to a diverse person? Because I know, so often you get like that cold email or that cold message on LinkedIn. Is that what you do? Or, is it literally because someone recommended you speak to them and then you ended up talking to them?
Yeah, so I don't think it's not just personal recommendations. Like, my producers do a lot of research to see like who's spoken out on a specific topic that we're looking to book in advance, and then finding them. Sometimes we do reach out on LinkedIn. That's a tried and true option. But when we can, we try and find personal emails or maybe a better way to reach out. And then I think, one of the goals in terms of how we do the outreach, and has always been important to me in my work, is that I intentionally am not how do I put this? I try never to bring on a diverse voice to explain what it's like to be a diverse voice. I want to bring on a diverse voice to explain what they're an expert in, what they're uniquely qualified for, what their career has been like. And so the questions around, and also, you know, I also am very conscious in how I produce segments or how I report out stories or Q&As, but I'm also never putting the burden on the person of color, on the woman to fix the problem, right? I'm sure, Stephanie, you've sat through so many, maybe you've asked these questions yourself, been asked these questions yourself, where journalists are kind of putting it on women. You know, I was on CBS this morning with Gail King last week, and her co-host, you know, Anthony was like, well, what can women do? Like, I came on and I was like, I said, yeah, women can do a few things here or there, but like, this isn't on women. This is on employers. This is on sexist, racist institutions to update their practices to change. And so like that question of like, what can women do? Like, I cringe anytime I see that. And so it's a matter of presenting the diverse voice, not as the authority in diversity, but as the expert that they are in their respective careers.
I love that. I love that. And just to touch on that, yes, I have been in many a room where they're just like, well, what can we do about diversity? And I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, you have enough emotional burden on the issue to begin with. Like, it needs to be on your white allies in the room to educate themselves on the issues and candidly fix the part of the problem that they might unconsciously be a part of.
Right. It's a tremendous amount of labor, especially when, you know, like not just with the hiring practices, but also with salary, you know, I mean, just simply having a conversation about like, you know, I posted my equal pay day story on Twitter today. So there was a prompt about like the 19th, love that publication. And, you know, what my story was, I found out that a colleague who had been there a year less than I had been was making $25,000 more than I was. And, you know, when I spoke to management, they gave me a bunch of empty answers and, you know, promises of a promotion. Oh, we can't give you that much money, like as a jump in salary. So then I left, you know, and not the industry, but the job, right? And sometimes that's what it takes to wake a company up when they're losing good talent.
Absolutely.
You know, it's just how do we move on from there, right? So I appreciate all the work that you're doing. I do want to open things up for questions. I don't see any hands yet. Don't be shy. I'm gonna give it a second while people gather their thoughts. Anybody here?
Anyone's wondering if Stephanie and I coordinated our outfits to look like Christmas? No, we did not.
No, we did not.
A fortunate preview into what your world will look like in December.
Oh my gosh, I'm hoping that it'll look more vaccinated and outside.
Yeah, I'm hoping to be in a real video studio at some point.
Oh, there's that too. Oh goodness. Yeah. Okay, so we do have a question from Laura Lorenzetti. I hope I pronounced that correctly. She said, how have you advocated for yourself in your career?
That's a great question, Laura. I think, you know, there are certain moments, you know, what I actually think is really interesting is that if you haven't ever been a manager and you haven't managed people, there's particularly in large companies, there's a lot that you don't understand in terms of like how the promotion cycle works, how pay equity works within your company, how salaries and promotions work. And so I feel like when I became a manager and kind of saw the other side of that, I became much better at figuring out how to advocate for pay, how to advocate for additional responsibility if that's something that you want in your job. And so in terms of how I've done that is, you know, I think when you go into a meeting with your manager and you're Stephanie, like you did, where you're trying to get, more money, it's really about kind of stating the case, right? Stating the case for how your responsibilities have grown since the last time that you were given a pay raise or, additional responsibilities, and how you want that either reflected in your perks or your pay or your title. And I think more than that, I think what really a lot of managers appreciate is also kind of closing the loop with that narrative of also demonstrating your continued investment in the organization and what you plan to achieve moving forward and why the pay warrants that given the work that you plan on doing. So I think it's really stating a case of what you did and, how it benefited the organization and being really clear about that. But then also saying, I'm continuing to devote my most precious time and resources, which is my time, my energy, and my career into this company. And this is what I plan on doing moving forward. And I think that that's a lot more effective way than just saying, I want $10,000 more. Is that something you can give me?
Yeah. I will say, for the record, I did not walk into my.
Oh no, your story is completely different. I wasn't saying that you did a bad job.
I know. I just wanted to.
If I learned that, all rationale would have gone out the window, and I will say though, I have had some direct reports come to me and just say, I just got this job offer. It's $40,000 more. I need that or I'm leaving. And that's like, okay, it signals to me as the manager that you're not invested in the organization, you're not invested in your role. And also it's kind of like, if that's if that's the main driver for you and this money is somewhere else, like go for it. Like people have different priorities in their career. So yeah.
Yeah. For me, it was like, I was doing more work than the man was, and had been there for longer and, had been stagnating in the position anyway. And I had, listed out all the things that I had done and gave them this big case file, right? And I was just like, this.
Yeah. And that's when you need to leave. That's a bad
place. And so then I did, I left. We do have another question. We have a hand up.
Oh, I love
I'm going to ask you to unmute, Susan, and you can ask your question.
Hey, Stephanie and Caroline, thank you for hosting this.
Hey, Susan.
My question, I guess, is kind of similar to Laura's. I have been a freelancer for many years, and I'm actually going into a full-time newsroom job starting this summer. And I'm just wondering if you could go back and
congratulations,
give yourself advice about what to do. I mean, it's like my first time being in a real newsroom. So I guess if you could give yourself advice about what to do, and is it just basically do everything like a normal job, work hard and show up on time, or is there anything else you wish you would have known?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I applaud that you were a freelancer. It's a lifestyle that I feel like I would be way too trepidatious to get into. I think it's such a great way to be able to do such meaningful work. But I think a scaredy cat like me, I don't know if I would feel confident enough having to go from story to story and making sure that the next one is coming. So congrats on that. It's something that I've thought about doing in my career before, but then I ultimately get too scared. But in terms of advice for, entering a newsroom or entering a new company, I think it's, specifically there's some great books that you can read about your first 90 days. And, fortunately, I do think that those first impressions that you have with your colleagues, they last. It's like anything else in life. It's hard to shake a bad first impression. So, early on in my career, when I started at new places, I kind of just rose my hand for everything. That is a really great way of kind of being seen as someone who is a go-to. So kind of just raising your hand for big or small things. Now I feel because there's mostly women here, don't raise your hands to take notes in the meetings or grab the coffee or clean up after when we go back into the office, the office things, or organize the baby shower. Don't raise your hand for all those things because they won't get you ahead and they're meaningless, but someone should do it. And more times it should be a man. But, raising your hand for the choice opportunities. And, also I think I would think about, kind of particularly what newsroom are you going into?
It's a fellowship at the Times.
Oh.
Congratulations. Look at you.
Congrats.
Well, I mean, a little intimidated right now.
Oh, don't be intimidated.
You're going to do great. I mean, and I also have some friends there if you want to be connected. I know the gender team there really well, and they're great women. So I would say is in that case, like, go in respecting kind of the legacy. I think sometimes, I know I've made this mistake in my career where I've come in with a lot of ideas, like come in really hot, like wanting to make that good first impression, wanting to show that I'm a mover and a shaker. And you really need to take that time, particularly when you join a new team, to kind of read the room a little bit. And that takes a lot. I do not envy my colleagues who have started working with me or working at a new job during this pandemic, because like it's hard enough to read a room in person, but to do it like this is so challenging. So I would just give yourself grace and know that it's going to take some time before you kind of really feel like you understand the politics of the team, the best way to get things done. Every workplace is different. Going from a media company like Time Inc. to a tech company like LinkedIn, it was like night and day different in terms of how things were done and how colleagues spoke to each other. So just respect that and know that, it'll probably take you at least 6 months to really feel like you understand like how work actually gets done.
Thank you so much. And do you have, you mentioned like a book for the first 90 days. Is there a resource that you would recommend?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have my monitor here right now. I can literally, I read it 6 years ago and it's literally called The First 90 Days.
Well, thank you so much for the
It clearly made an impression.
Yeah, it's by Michael Watkins.
Okay.
Speaking of first jobs, what do you think of, what would you recommend to people who are interested in, actually working for LinkedIn, whether it's their first job or they're a journalist continuing in their career and they want to transition as the editor at large of LinkedIn News? Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's actually a question that I find myself having to answer more and more. I have, students from my alma mater reaching out who are interested in journalism. And I kind of find that every year my answer gets a little bit different. And I think that really speaks to the evolving nature of journalism. Look, when I graduated, like all I wanted was a traditional job in a traditional newsroom, hopefully a magazine. I wanted to be in magazine writing. And I still see students graduating or entering the workforce and wanting that. And unfortunately, those jobs, they look so different than they did, 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. And candidly, the people who are going to those magazines for news and information, is also changing as well. So I think in a world in which everyone, the gatekeepers of information, people can get their news from anywhere. They can get it from social platforms. They can get it from their friends. They can, go on to Medium or LinkedIn and share their insights themselves. They don't even have to go through reporters anymore to really share their story. And so I think with that world in mind, thinking more proactively around, what the future state of news information is going to be, where are people not going to be reading their news today, but where are they going to be reading it in 5 years? I always think that there's going to be legacy institutions like the Times and the Journal and the FT that everyone will continue to go to as a trusted source. But other than that, I think we're going to see a lot of individual journalists break out and kind of create platforms for themselves. I think that we're going to see a lot more focus on, I hope so, on community-based news and niche publications that can thrive and find community in a smaller way. So I think going in with more of an open mind and understanding that what you might have been learning in school about journalism or what your professors had done or the career path of, say, the women that you look up to in the industry, that might look entirely different than what yours is going to look like. And that's not just okay, it's almost expected at this point. So like, I think I always wonder, where my career would be right now if I hadn't left Fortune, because that was the biggest risk that I've taken in my career was, leaving this established top business magazine to start something new with LinkedIn. And of course, I can't go back in time and kind of watch the play out to see what it would have looked like. But what I will say is that I can't imagine that I would have learned as much in the past 6 years as I have now if I had just stayed where legacy print and journalism lives right now.
Oh, I totally agree. When I was in journalism school, one of my professors is here. Hi, Marcy. When I was in journalism school, I always wanted to be, I wanted to work in broadcast. I wanted to be a producer. I wanted to produce segments, and I was all on board for it. My path to MSNBC, not what I thought it was going to be. Definitely ended up, working and like kind of heading up the social team at Reuters for several years, and producing packages and doing Facebook Live, which didn't exist when I was in college. Technology is a funny thing, and it helps to be, on the cutting edge of how news changes throughout the years.
Yeah, but like, to be real, it's just exhausting, right?
Yes,
like
completely.
I think back, I think back to editors that I have and still have who, I'm thinking of one editor in particular, like his job for several years was to write 3 or 4 long form features for Fortune magazine. And that was it. That was all he was responsible for. He wrote like 4 big stories a year, and that was his job. And he got paid well for it. This is like 15, 20 years ago. Yeah. And I'm thinking about what journalism looks like now. And now it's like, you got to write, you got to tweet, you got to TikTok, you got to be on the gram, you got to be doing live stuff, you got to be producing, you got, like, it's so encompassing, and it's such a one man band mentality to journalism right now, that makes you feel like you kind of constantly have to be not just reporting and writing, but then selling and distributing the story too, and making sure that people are reading it. And so I do stress that with people who are early on in their career, or students who come to me, because I think the only way that works is if you really love it. And I'm fortunate that I'm very passionate about what I cover, and I do love it enough to put in all of that time and energy. But if you don't, there are other jobs where there are other folks who can help you do all this stuff.
Yes. And even if you love it, self-care is a thing. Making time, to have some downtime, and maybe you don't want to read that long think piece. Maybe you just want to sit down and watch WandaVision. That's okay. That's
exactly.
really, really important.
I know. I watch a lot of 90 Day Fiance. Like my mom is always on top of me, because she's like, I don't understand how you watch this trash TV. And I was like, when I get to the end of the day, I write about like devastating stuff. Like when I get to the end of the day, I need to turn off my brain at least for an hour, and not, like she does, turn on CNN.
Right. There's another question, again from Susan. She wants to know if there are any organizations or memberships that either of us have found particularly helpful during our time in journalism, and also if you have any advice for finding mentors or sponsors.
Stephanie, I'm going to lean on you on the membership aspect of this, because I'm not. I was a part of one, and now I can't remember its name. Clearly, I'm not an expert in it.
Well, you're clearly part of Newswomen's Club of New York, so like.
Yeah. Well, of course. I thought that was unsaid. Of course, the Newswomen's Club of New York is. But I was trying to think of something other than that. What I will say in terms of mentors and sponsors is, I find myself in like a really unique position in that everyone that I interview is like the dream mentor or sponsor. And so I find myself sometimes, I've been in the fortunate situation where I've been able to cultivate with a few, women who I've struck a particular bond with, or have, worked with throughout the years, a relationship that runs a little bit deeper than just a source relationship. So that's been really rewarding for me. And I think like the larger lesson there is that, I wouldn't be afraid to, once you feel like you've established a relationship with someone that you admire, either in the industry or outside of it, checking, just putting it out there that, that you need advice, or you want to hop on the phone for 15 minutes to assess a job opportunity. I think that once you kind of establish this kind of a base relationship with someone, which for journalists is kind of the name of the game. You're constantly trying to create more source relations, trying to ensure that the top people in whatever beat that you cover know who you are. I think that there are opportunities while still remaining objective to turn those relationships into mentor and sponsorship relationships. And then specific to mentorship and in the female journalism community, like I've always found that there is a lot of camaraderie there. So I there's like Claire Can Miller, who's at the New York Times. I'm obsessed with her work. I spent months and months and months like saying, I really want to talk to her, but I don't want to inconvenience her. And I just sent her an email, and within 10 minutes, she responded and said, do you have time for coffee this week? And then I felt so dumb that I had been in my head for so long about reaching out to her. I could have done it a year before that. So I think, if there's someone that you see a career path or someone that you want to reach out to, I wouldn't hesitate to do that, because a lot of women, particularly in this field, understand that we're somewhat few and far between, and are willing to step up.
Awesome. I'll cover the organizations part. I've been part of a few. Obviously, I'm also vice president of this club, but the ones that I found helpful, Marcy helpfully put one in the chat, which is the New York Women in Communications, which is based here in New York, obviously. And this is also based here in New York. Then there's JAWS, which is the Journalism and Women's Symposium, the National Press Club, SPJ. So there's all of that. They typically also have local chapters, like the Deadline Club, which is like the New York chapter. And all of those are like welcoming. Obviously, there's women-based ones, and then there's the wider-based ones like the National Press Club and SPJ. Those are welcoming to journalists. They have classes, symposiums, workshops, opportunities to find mentorship, and to connect you with members. They have other programming when like the world is open. And I have found that to be immensely helpful. I have found quite a mentor through going to a program. I literally walked up to somebody and started a conversation after they were on a panel, and I guess I'm venturing into mentor land now, and said I just had some questions and I would love to pick their brain and just talk to them back and forth. And we ended up developing this relationship that turned out to be pretty great. My take on mentorship is like not to be afraid. Like you're not going to lose anything as long as you are respectful about something. I mean, I'm not saying go up to like Gayle King and say, hey girl, but what I will say is that most times people remember where they were, when they started out in journalism, they remember the hustle that they had to put forth in order to make it in this industry. And so many are so welcoming to the idea of being able to pass on some sort of knowledge or connections. I have a friend who every so often will see someone's name in an article, and they'll find them on LinkedIn and send them a message and say, hey, I saw you quoted in this article. I thought this was really interesting. I would love, I'm in this industry. They explain who they are and, ask them for a 15-minute conversation on the phone. And sometimes that goes somewhere. Sometimes it's just that conversation. And it's so interesting how we can learn and grow from those interactions. So we have one more question in here before we close things out. It's from Michelle, and she's asking, what's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Oh boy, the best piece of advice I've ever been given. So I'll say two things, even though I was asked for one. This is not something that someone gave me, but it's something that I think is something that I'm starting to learn in my career, is what got you to the position that you are in your career is not going to be the same as what gets you to the next position. And what I mean more specifically is, I was just talking to Susan about, when you start out someplace, the best thing to do is to raise your hand for everything. Well, I'm in a position right now at this company where if I continue to raise my hand for everything, which honestly is my go-to move, just like not ask for help, not delegate, but just get the work done, I'm not going to continue to be as successful as I could be. So I think that's one. And then, it's Sheryl Sandberg, I think, said it, but if you get offered a seat on a rocket ship, don't question what seat in particular it is. So in the world of media, if you're seeing growth someplace and we want to be a part of it, rather than worrying about maybe the title and pay is important, but rather than worry about the title or specifically what you're going to be doing when you get there. Like, for example, when I started at LinkedIn, I was covering startups, which wasn't a passion of mine, but I did see that there was opportunity to make a name for myself there and perhaps do something else. So, go to where the growth is, and don't necessarily worry so much what you're going to do when you get there. Every single job that I've ever had in journalism did not exist before I got there. So it's a matter of, proving out that you are someone who can create great things. And I think your career can just play out from there.
I will tack on to that. Someone else messaged and said, seek out opportunities, be a great team player, be fun to work with, work on self-awareness. Yes, all those things are so key. And I will tack on something that you didn't say that you did in your career though. Don't be afraid to innovate. Don't be afraid to do the work and then present it and say, hey, I did this reporting because I was interested in this topic, and is it something we're interested in publishing, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's what you did, right? You started doing it, and then suddenly they gave you the opportunity. I myself have seen that work out for myself at multiple outlets. I wouldn't say do it the first week that you're there, but once you understand how your office, your newsroom works, and who does what where, and who would be open to new ideas, there are so many ways that we can make opportunities for ourselves that currently aren't present. And that's my last word, because this is not my one-on-one. I do want to take the moment to thank you, Caroline, for
thank you so much for having me. It was fun, and thanks to everyone who joined us.
Yeah, it's absolutely great. Thank you, audience, for joining us. You've been exceptional guests. I really love this conversation. I would love to have you back for another hour to talk more. We can talk about that later. And I do want to plug some upcoming programming, because we have some really great stuff coming up, including how to get hired in the pandemic at NBC, which is going to take place on March 31st at 2 p.m. with two talent recruitment managers from NBC, one that covers NBC and MSNBC, one that covers CNBC. So that's a nice little spread, and we'll be talking to them about how to get past the portal, how to get in contact with recruiters and not overwhelm them, and how to tailor yourself and make yourself the best that you can be when you're looking for that. We're also going to have similar programs with the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times in April. So, keep an eye on our Eventbrite page. It's actually up if you want to get a ticket. And we're also going to have a chat with Taffy Brodesser-Ackner, whose name I always mess up, and I'm sorry if that was a mess up. And she's going to do a Ask Me Anything, which is kind of what Caroline and I were doing, except I won't be in the picture. I'll just simply introduce her, and everyone will kind of just ask Taffy some questions, which I think will be awesome. She's an author. She writes for the New York Times Magazine. She won her front page awards for a really beautiful interview with Tom Hanks. And one of her books is being, I think, optioned into a TV series. So I have questions. I hope you do too. So you can join us for that event also in April 21st. Again, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. And thank you so much for coming this evening and all of this amazing information that you shared with us.
Thank you.
That's it.
Bye.
Good night.